Today, we are going to fundamentally change the relationship you have with your lunch.
That's a big promise.
I think we can deliver. And I don't mean we're going to give you a new diet or tell you to eat more kale. I mean, we are going to change how you perceive the act of eating itself.
It's a paradigm shift, really.
Yeah.
We usually see eating as this, this passive, pleasurable, routine thing.
Right. You see a sandwich, you chew, you swallow, you feel full. It feels simple.
It feels like a leisure activity, but it's not.
Not at all. If you actually look at the logistics and we're digging into the biological manual for what happens the second that food hits your tongue, it is a deceptive act.
Oh, completely.
It is a high-stakes tactical operation. We are talking about chemical warfare, intricate transport systems, strict border control, and some heavy-duty manufacturing.
And if you look at the source material we are covering today, Chapter 43, Nutrition, Digestion, Absorption by Bender and Mays, it describes a system that is running on a knife's edge.
This isn't some pop science article, is it?
No. This is the heavy-duty manual for the human machine. And the complexity is, it's just staggering.
It really is. The mission for this deep dive is to explain every single step of how we turn food into self. We want to look at the specific enzymes, the physics of absorption, and, unfortunately, the tragic failures of this system.
But before we even get into the molecules, I think it's worth mentioning how the text opens. They don't start with chemistry.
No, they start with a paradox, the biomedical paradox.
It's a fascinating and, frankly, terrifying way to frame the whole conversation.
Yes.
It really sets the global stage.
It does. The text highlights that for the vast majority of human history, and still for a huge part of the developing world, the problem has been undernutrition, deficiency.
Right. We evolved in a context of scarcity. The default state of humanity has been a constant struggle just to get enough fuel.
And that leads to, what, impaired growth, defective immunity?
Reduced work capacity, all the things that come from just not having enough raw materials. That is the historical norm. But the paradox is that we've completely flipped the script in the developed world.
The text drops a statistic that, honestly, it stopped me in my tracks.
I know the one you mean.
It says there are now more overweight and obese people globally than there are undernourished people.
Just take a second and think about the implications of that. For millions of years, the primary threat was starvation. Now, in a blink of an eye, evolutionarily speaking, the threat is excessive consumption.
We moved from a world of scarcity to a world of abundance, but our hardware, it hasn't updated.
That's the key, isn't it? The machinery we were about to discuss, all these enzymes, these pumps, these regulators, it was all designed for scarcity. It is ruthlessly efficient at extracting every single calorie because it thinks it might not see another one for a week.
So we're running famine-era software in a feast-era environment.
Exactly. And that mismatch is the root of the modern pathology. The text lists obesity, type 2 diabetes, cardiovascular disease, cancer. The system doesn't know how to say no to energy.
Because historically, saying no meant death.
It did. So today, we're going to trace that software. We're going to follow the path of the food, starting from the very first bite.
Let's get into the nitty-gritty. Segment 1, the sugar rush, or, more formally, the digestion and absorption of carbohydrates.
And this starts with a pretty big chemistry problem. Most of the carbohydrates we eat, bread, pasta, potatoes, they're in the form of starch. And the text calls these polysaccharides.
Okay, let's break that word down. Poly means many.
And saccharide means sugar.
So many sugars.
Right. Imagine a massive, long pearl necklace that is a starch molecule. It's thousands of glucose units all linked together. But here is the fundamental rule of the intestine. No necklace is allowed.
The strict border control we mentioned.
The intestinal wall is like a brick wall with tiny, tiny mail slots. And those slots are designed for monosaccharides, single pearls. If you try to shove the whole necklace through, or even a chain of, say, 3 pearls, it won't fit.
So the body just can't absorb starch directly. It has to be chopped up first.
The goal of digestion, chemically speaking, is just chopping. The technical term is hydrolysis.
Using water to cut the bonds.
Exactly. And this chopping process starts way, way earlier than most people realize. It starts right now in your mouth if you're chewing on something.
With saliva.
Salivary amylase. This is an enzyme secreted by your salivary glands. And while you are chewing, this enzyme is already launching an attack on that starch. Specifically, it targets the alpha 1 to 4 glycoside bonds.
Alpha 1 to 4, I love how specific that is. It sounds like a coordinate system on a map.
It essentially is. It describes the geometry of the link holding the glucose units together in a straight line. And amylase is what we call an endoglycosidase.
Endo meaning inside.
Inside, yes. It means it's a random chopper. It doesn't start at the end of the necklace and nibble its way in. It jumps into the middle of the chain and snips it wherever it finds a valid bond.
So it's just creating chaos in that long starch chain.
Precisely. It's turning long chains into shorter chains called dextrins. But, and this is a really big, but amylase has a weakness. It's a protein, and like most proteins, it is very sensitive to pH.
And the stomach is basically an acid bath.
Correct. The moment you swallow that bolus of food and it hits the stomach acid, the pH plummets. This acidic environment denatures the salivary amylase.
It kills the enzyme.
It unfolds it, renders it useless. So carbohydrate digestion basically comes to a screeching halt in the stomach.
So the piece of bread you just ate is just sitting there, only partially chopped up.
Right. It's a messy mix of dextrins, maybe some maltose, some maltotriose, but it is nowhere near ready to be absorbed. It has to wait until the stomach empties it out into the small intestine.
And that's where the heavy artillery comes in.
That's where the pancreas comes in. The pancreas secretes pancreatic amylase. This is the reinforcement wave. It floods the small intestine and finishes the job that the saliva started. It chops all those remaining starch chains down into very, very small units.
But we still aren't at single sugars yet, are we? We're close, but we're not quite there.
No. At this stage, we mostly have disaccharides, 2 sugars linked together, and maybe some trisaccharides. They're still too big for the mail slot. We need the final specialists, the finishers.
The text describes this area as the brush border. That's a great visual.
It is, isn't it? If you zoom in on the lining of the intestine, it's not smooth at all. To maximize surface area, the wall is folded into these things called villi, and the cells on those villi have even tinier microscopic hairs called microvilli.
So it looks like a shag carpet or a brush.
Exactly. That is the brush border. And the final enzymes are sitting right there on the hairs.
They're anchored to the membrane.
Anchored right to the membrane. They are the final gatekeepers.
Yeah.
You have maltase, which splits maltose. You have sucrase isomaltase, which is this really cool bifunctional enzyme that handles sucrose, that's table sugar, and also the branch points in starch. And then you have the famous one.
Lactase.
Lactase. This is the one that seems to cause the most trouble for the most people.
Right. The text goes into the evolutionary context of lactase, which is, it's fascinating.
It is. Lactase is the enzyme that splits lactose milk sugar into glucose and galactose. Now, think about mammalian biology for a second. Who drinks milk?
Infants, babies, that's it.
Exactly. Once a mammal is weaned, it never drinks milk again in the wild. So biologically, it makes absolutely no sense to keep producing the lactase enzyme. It's a waste of energy and resources. So the gene usually just shuts down after weaning.
So hold on. Being lactose intolerant as an adult is actually the biological normal.
It is the wild type phenotype. It's the default setting. If you are an adult and you can drink a milkshake without any issues, you are the mutant. You have a mutation called lactase persistence.
That is wild. We always frame it the other way around, like it's a deficiency.
I know. But the text points out that this mutation is actually quite specific geographically. It's found in North European populations and specific nomadic tribes in Africa and Arabia.
So basically, populations that domesticated cattle and relied on milk for survival.
Survival of the milk drinkers, exactly. If you could access that calorie source during a famine, you survived and you pass that gene on.
But let's look at what happens when you don't have the enzyme. Because the mechanism of lactose intolerance explains a lot about how digestion works in general.
It's a great case study. The text describes it as a physics problem, really.
Right?
It is. If you lack lactase, the lactose molecule stays in the intestine. It's too big to be absorbed. Now, sugar is what we call osmotically active.
Meaning it attracts water?
It pulls water. So this unabsorbed sugar in your gut starts pulling water from your bloodstream into the intestine.
Which creates, well, a lot of volume.
Yeah. Fluidity and volume. Distension. But then it gets worse.
Yeah.
That sugar travels down to the colon where your microbiome lives, your gut bacteria.
And those bacteria, they love sugar.
They go to town on it. They ferment it aggressively.
The fermentation produces gas.
A lot of gas.
Yeah.
Carbon dioxide, hydrogen, methane. So you have the combination of excess fluid, which causes osmotic diarrhea, and excess gas, which causes bloating and cramps, all because of one single missing enzyme on the brush border.
That's incredible. Okay, so let's assume the enzymes all work. We've chopped everything into monosaccharides, glucose, galactose, fructose. Now we face the mail slots, the transporters.
This is where we see that scarcity mindset of the body in action. The text details 2 completely different systems for getting sugar from the gut into the blood. For glucose and galactose, we use the SGLT1 transporter.
SGLT1.
The sodium glucose transporter. This is an active pump. It's fascinating because it doesn't just let glucose in, it drags it in, kicking and screaming.
How does it do that?
It uses the sodium gradient, which the body spends a ton of energy maintaining, to pull glucose into the cell, even against the concentration gradient.
So even if the cell is already packed full of sugar, SGLT1 just keeps pumping more in.
Yes. It burns ATP to do it. It's basically screaming, I don't care if we're full, we cannot afford to waste a single molecule of energy. It is a high-affinity, high-capacity vacuum cleaner for glucose.
But then there's fructose, the sugar you find in fruit and honey. It's different.
Fructose uses a different door. It uses a transporter called GLUT5. And GLUT5 is totally different from SGLT1. It is facilitated diffusion.
What's the difference?
Facilitated diffusion is passive. It acts like a swinging door. It just allows fructose to flow from an area of high concentration to an area of low concentration. Doesn't use any energy. It doesn't pump.
So if the concentration on both sides of the door evens out?
The flow stops. It gets lazy. SGLT1 is a workaholic. GLUT5 is a slacker. This is the fundamental reason why fructose is absorbed much, much slower than glucose.
And the text mentions a real-world consequence of this, which brings us back to what we were just talking about.
The osmotic diarrhea trap again. Since fructose absorbs slowly, if you eat a massive amount of it, or sugar alcohols like sorbitol, which use similar passive mechanisms, you just overwhelm the transporter.
The GLUT5 swinging door gets jammed with too many people trying to get through at once.
It just can't keep up. The excess fructose sits in the gut, pulls in water, gets fermented by bacteria, and you get the exact same symptoms as lactose intolerance.
That explains the infamous online reviews for those sugar-free gummy bears.
It is a perfect example of a GLUT5 bottleneck. The text explicitly mentions that large intakes of fructose and sugar alcohols lead to osmotic diarrhea. It's purely a matter of transport kinetics.
Before we leave carbs, we have to talk about the glycemic index. It's a buzzword we hear constantly, but the text defines it quite specifically.
It's an index from 1 to 100, and it basically compares how much a given food raises your blood glucose relative to pure glucose, which is assigned the value of 100.
But the text adds some nuance, right? It's not just sugar is sugar.
No, the structure of the starch matters. The particle size matters. Whether it's cooked or raw, all these things affect how quickly the amylase can chop it up.
But the part that really interested me was the discussion on fiber. We usually think of fiber as just bulk, something that keeps you regular.
Right, non-starch polysaccharides. We lack the enzymes to digest them. But the text frames them as essential fuel, not for us, but for our tenants.
The gut bacteria.
Exactly. The colonic bacteria take these fibers that we can't use, and they ferment them. And in doing so, they produce short-chain fatty acids. And the most important one mentioned in the text is butyrate.
And butyrate does something incredible.
It has anti-proliferative activity.
Which means?
To stop cells from dividing uncontrollably. The text suggests that butyrate helps protect the cells of the colon from becoming cancerous. It's a major fuel source for those cells, and it keeps them healthy.
So fiber isn't just mechanical bulk. It is the raw material for an anti-cancer drug that's produced inside your own body.
That's a perfect way to put it. If you starve your bacteria of fiber, you lose that protection. It's a truly symbiotic relationship. We feed them, they protect us.
That is a huge takeaway. Feed the tenants. Okay, let's shift gears. We've done the sugar. Now we have to do the heavy lifting. Segment 2, oil and water.
This is a much, much harder engineering challenge.
Because the body is mostly water.
We are aqueous beings. Digestion happens in a watery soup in your intestines. But lipids fats are hydrophobic. They hate water. They're repelled by it.
So when you eat a burger, the fat doesn't just mix in.
No, it separates. It forms a large, oily glob in the stomach. Now remember, digestion is all about enzymes attacking molecules. And enzymes can only work on the surface of that glob.
And a big glob has a very little surface area compared to its total volume.
Exactly. If you left it as one big glob, you would never digest it in time. It would just pass right through you, undigested.
So, the very first step isn't chemical digestion, it's physics. You need to smash the glob.
Emulsification. You need a detergent. Enter. Bile salts. These were synthesized in the liver from cholesterol, stored in the gallbladder, and then secreted into the intestine right when you eat a fatty meal.
And they act just like dish soap on a greasy pan.
Chemically, yes. They are amphipathic molecules. One side loves water, the other side loves fat. They arrange themselves around the fat and break that big glob into millions of tiny little droplets, less than a single micrometer in size.
Which massively increases the surface area.
Exponentially. Now, the enzymes have a battlefield they can actually work with. And the primary weapon here is pancreatic lipase.
But wait, the text mentions a plot twist here. The detergents, the bile salts, they actually get in the way of the enzyme.
It does. It's kind of a design flaw. The bile salts coat the droplets so thoroughly that the lipase enzyme can't get close enough to the fat to actually cut it. The shield is too good.
So the solution creates a whole new problem. Classic.
But biology always has a patch for the bug. The pancreas secretes a helper protein called collipase. Think of collipase as a wedge. It binds to the bile salt layer, and it physically pushes it aside, creating a little landing pad for the lipase. It anchors the enzyme to the droplet. Without collipase, lipase is pretty much useless.
That is some intricate teamwork. So the lipase gets in there, what does it do?
It performs very specific surgery. It targets the triacylglycerol molecule. The easiest way to visualize this is like a capital letter E. The backbone is a glycerol molecule, and the 3 horizontal arms are fatty acids.
And lipase cuts the arms off.
It cuts the top arm at position 1 and the bottom arm at position 3. It always leaves the middle arm attached. This is called its SN1 and SN3 specificity.
So you were left with 2 free fatty acids and a 2-monoacylglycerol.
Correct. These are the digestion products. But we still have the water problem. These little parts are still oily. They can't just swim through the water to get to the intestinal wall.
They need a vehicle, a shuttle.
They form as cells. These are incredibly small, disc-shaped clusters, about 4 to 6 nanometers wide. The text calls them a shuttle system, and that's exactly what they are.
That is nanoscale engineering happening in your gut.
It really is. The micelles ferry the fatty acids, the monoacylglycerols, and also the fat-soluble vitamins A, D, E, and K through that watery layer right up to the brush border. There, the cargo is dropped off and slips into the cell.
But here's the part that always blows my mind. We spend all this energy breaking the fat down, emulsifying it, chopping the E apart. But once it gets inside the cell, what happens?
We rebuild it.
Yeah.
We put it all back together.
It's the IKEA effect. You take the table apart to get it through the narrow door of your apartment, and then you reassemble it in the living room.
But why? Why not just keep them as parts?
Because free fatty acids act like detergents themselves. If you had high concentrations of them floating around in your blood, they would start dissolving your cell membranes. They're actually quite toxic in high amounts. You need to package them safely for long-distance transport.
So the cell uses the 2-monoacylglycerol pathway to stitch them back together into triacylglycerols. Yes. It re-scarifies them. And then it wraps them in a protein coat to make the whole package water-soluble. This finished package is called a chylomicron.
A chylomicron? That sounds like a transformer.
It's a lipid bomb. It's a huge particle. In fact, it is so large that it cannot fit into the blood capillaries in the gut.
Wait a second. So sugar goes directly into the blood, but fat doesn't?
Not immediately, no. The capillaries in the gut wall have tight junctions between the cells. The chylomicrons are just too big to squeeze in, so they have to take a detour. They enter the lymphatic system, specifically through vessels called lacteals.
The lymph system, that's usually for immune cells and fluid balance, right?
And for fat transport. The fat travels through these lymph vessels, completely bypassing the liver at first, and is eventually dumped into the bloodstream via the thoracic duct right near your heart.
That explains why the liver doesn't get first crack at the fat you eat, unlike with sugar.
Exactly. It's a completely different highway system designed for a different kind of cargo.
Before we wrap up fats, there was a medical side note in the text that I found really interesting. A drug called orlistat.
Yes, it's a weight loss drug.
Yeah.
And now that you know the mechanism, you can understand exactly how it works. Orlistat is an inhibitor of pancreatic lipase.
It gums up the scissors.
It gums up the scissors. It stops the breakdown of triacylglycerols. And if you can't break the fat down into those absorbable parts, you can't form micelles, and you can't absorb it.
So where does the fat go?
It stays in the intestine,
Yeah.
and eventually it leaves the body in your stool.
Which leads to some famously unpleasant side effects.
Steatorrhea is the clinical term, fatty stools.
Hmm.
It's a very visceral demonstration of how necessary that enzymatic digestion is for absorption. If you break that single link in the chain, the whole system fails.
Okay, let's move to segment 3. We've done energy with carbs and fat. Now we need to talk about structure. Protein.
Dismantling the machinery. This is by far the highest risk operation in the entire gut.
Why is it so high risk?
Because you are made of protein. Your stomach lining, your intestinal walls, the enzymes themselves, it's all protein. The fundamental challenge is, how do you digest a steak without digesting your own stomach?
It's like trying to dissolve a plastic bottle with a solvent that's stored inside another plastic bottle.
That's a perfect analogy. The body solves this with a brilliant system of zymogens.
Zymogens.
These are inactive precursors to the enzymes. The pancreas synthesizes the digestive enzymes, but they are dormant. They have a safety pin in them, a little extra piece of protein that covers up the active site. They're chemically incapable of cutting anything while they're inside the pancreas cells.
So they are safe to handle and transport.
Yes, they're only activated once they reach the designated kill zone, which is the lumen of the gut.
How are they activated? Who pulls the pin?
The first step happens in the stomach. The acidic environment there activates a zymogen called pepsinogen into its active form, pepsin. Pepsin starts the chopping. But the main cascade happens in the small intestine. There is a master switch enzyme called enteropeptidase.
Enteropeptidase.
It sits on the brush border. When the inactive enzyme trypsinogen comes out of the pancreas and hits the intestine, enteropeptidase snips off a tiny piece of it. This simple cut changes the shape of the molecule and turns it into its active form, trypsin.
And trypsin is the boss.
Trypsin is the field commander. Once trypsin is active, it immediately turns around and activates all the other zymogens. It activates chymotrypsin, elastase, carboxypeptidases. It triggers a massive chain reaction of activation.
It's like a military activation code. One correct signal unleashes the entire army.
It is. And the text highlights what happens when this goes wrong. If trypsin gets activated prematurely inside the pancreas, for instance, due to a blockage or injury, it causes acute pancreatitis.
The pancreas starts to digest itself.
It is an agonizing, life-threatening condition. The organ literally liquefies from the inside out. It just shows you how potent these chemical weapons really are.
So assuming the safety mechanisms work, how do they actually cut the protein apart?
They use a pincer movement. The text distinguishes between endopeptidases and exopeptidases.
Endo means inside. Exo means outside.
Right. The endopeptidases, like trypsin and chymotrypsin, attack the center of the protein chain. They are the heavy choppers. They take the long polypeptide and break it into smaller chunks.
And the exopeptidases.
They nibble from the ends. Carboxypeptidases take off one amino acid at a time from the carboxyl end of the chain. And aminopeptidases, which are on the brush border, work from the amino end.
So they dismantle the wall brick by brick.
Exactly. And here is where protein absorption gets really interesting. With sugar, we said no chains allowed, single sugars only. But with protein, the body breaks its own rule. It has a fast lane.
The peptide-1 transporter.
Yes. The text explains that the body can actually absorb dipeptides and tripeptides, that's chains of 2 or 3 amino acids, completely intact. They have their own special transporter, peptide-1.
Why break the rule for protein? What's the advantage?
Efficiency. It is simply faster to pull in a chain of 3 amino acids in one go than to pull in 3 separate ones. You get more nitrogen into the blood per second this way. Once they're inside the cell, intracellular enzymes finish the job and break them into single amino acids.
But the text also mentions a danger with absorbing chains, even small ones.
Allergies. This is crucial. If a larger peptide, say a chain of 10 amino acids, manages to slip through the lining, perhaps between the cells in what's called paracellular transport, the body has a problem.
It's inside the border, but it hasn't been de-identified. It's not a standard brick.
Exactly. The immune system sees it. And because it's a unique structure, the immune system recognizes it as foreign. It's not amino acid fuel. It's a potential alien invader.
So the immune system mounts an attack.
It produces antibodies against that specific peptide sequence. This is the sensitization process. The next time you eat that protein, whether it's from peanuts, shellfish, or gluten, the antibodies are ready and waiting, and they launch a massive inflammatory response. That is a food allergy. It is essentially a failure of complete digestion or a breach of the border security.
That transitions us perfectly to the next segment, segment 4, the nitrogen ledger. Because we don't just eat protein for energy, we eat it to build things.
Right. Carbs and fats are primarily fuel. You burn them for heat and work. Protein is structural. It's the steel beams and the wiring of the skyscraper. And the way we measure protein status is by tracking nitrogen.
Why nitrogen specifically?
Because unlike carbs and fats, protein is the only macronutrient that contains nitrogen. It's about 16% by weight. So scientists use nitrogen balance as a proxy for your overall protein balance.
The text describes 3 states: equilibrium, positive, and negative.
Equilibrium is where a healthy adult should be. Nitrogen in equals nitrogen out. You're eating enough protein to replace the cells you lose every day. You are maintaining your structure.
Positive balance sounds like a good thing.
Positive means you are keeping more nitrogen than you are excreting. You are building new tissue. This is seen in growing children, pregnant women, or bodybuilders. They are chemically accumulating self.
And negative balance.
That is the red alert. That means you are excreting more nitrogen than you are taking in. You are breaking down your own body tissues to survive.
The text got really dark here. It talks about the metabolic response to trauma.
It's a very sobering section. If you have major surgery, a severe burn, or a bad infection, the body goes into a hypercatabolic state. It releases a flood of stress hormones like cortisol and inflammatory cytokines.
And these hormones and cytokines tell the body to tear down its own muscle.
Yes. The text mentions that even simple bed rest causes muscle atrophy, but trauma is aggressive. The body dissolves skeletal muscle to release amino acids into the blood.
Why would it do that? Why destroy the engine to save the car?
Because the immune system becomes the absolute priority. The body needs those amino acid raw materials immediately to build antibodies, to make acute phase proteins for the inflammatory response, and to heal the wound. It's literally burning the furniture to keep the house warm.
That is a vivid image.
It's a survival trade-off. It's sacrificing long-term strength and mobility for short-term survival. That's why nutrition support in hospitals is so critical to try and stop that catastrophic muscle wasting.
This brings up the concept of essential amino acids. We can't make all the bricks ourselves.
No, there are 9 essential amino acids: histidine, isoleucine, leucine, lysine, methionine, phenylalanine, threonine, tryptophan, and valine. We absolutely must get these from our diet. Our bodies don't have the metabolic pathways to synthesize them.
But the text adds a nuance about conditional essentials.
This is a cool supply chain detail. Take cysteine and tyrosine. Our bodies can make them. So technically, they are non-essential. But how do we make them? We make cysteine from methionine. We make tyrosine from phenylalanine.
So we make them from other essential amino acids.
Exactly. So if your diet is deficient in methionine, suddenly you can't make cysteine. Cysteine becomes conditionally essential. You have to get it from your diet because the factory line that produces it is down.
And what happens if you're missing just one of the essential amino acids? Can you just build a protein with a missing brick and leave a gap?
No, this is the limiting amino acid concept. Protein synthesis is an all-or-nothing process. If the blueprint calls for lysine at position 42 and there's no lysine available, the ribosome just stops. It stalls, falls off the mRNA strand, and the whole thing is aborted.
You can't just sub in something else.
No. The half-finished, useless protein is trashed. It gets broken back down into its component amino acids. So if you were missing one essential ingredient, the entire construction site shuts down. It's remarkably inefficient, but it ensures quality control.
That explains why the concept of complete proteins is so important. Okay, let's zoom in even further. Segment 5, the micromanagers, vitamins and minerals.
We've seen that for fats and carbs, the body is greedy. It just grabs everything it can via SGLT1 or simple diffusion. But for minerals, the strategy completely flips.
It becomes incredibly picky.
It becomes paranoid, especially with iron.
The text calls iron the toxic essential.
It's a perfect description. We need iron for hemoglobin to carry oxygen. Life absolutely depends on it. But free iron-bound iron is incredibly toxic.
Yeah.
It catalyzes the formation of free radicals through the Fenton reaction. It literally rusts you from the inside out.
And the human body has a major design flaw when it comes to iron.
A huge flaw. We have no way to actively excrete it.
We can't just pee it out.
No. There is no iron pump in the kidney or the gut to push it out. We lose a tiny fixed amount when we bleed or shed skin and gut cells, but we can't ramp that up if we have too much. If we absorb too much iron, we're just stuck with it. It accumulates in the liver, heart, and pancreas, a condition called hemochromatosis.
So if we can't control the exit, we have to be extremely strict about controlling the entrance.
Precisely. Border control is the only defense we have. The text details the mechanism. First, there's the chemistry. Iron needs to be in the ferrous state, that's Fe2 plus ion T, to be absorbed. Most iron in plants is in the ferric state, F3 plus ion.
So we need to reduce it chemically.
Vitamin C is a huge help here. It acts as a reducing agent, turning F3 plus into the more absorbable Fe2 plus iron. This is why the old advice to drink orange juice with your spinach or steak is actually biochemically sound.
It preps the guests for entry.
It gets them their visa. But once the iron gets into the intestinal cell, it faces the master regulator, a hormone called hepcidin.
Hepcidin.
This is a peptide hormone produced by the liver. It acts as the central thermostat for iron in the body. If the liver senses that its iron stores are full, or if it senses inflammation from an infection, it releases hepcidin into the blood.
And what does hepcidin do?
It travels to the intestine, and it binds to the exit door, the transporter called ferroportin. When it binds, it causes that door to be internalized and destroyed.
So the iron gets into the cell, but it can't get out into the bloodstream. It's trapped.
Exactly. It is trapped inside the intestinal lining cell, the enterocyte. And here is the brutal efficiency of the system. Those intestinal cells only live for about 3 to 5 days. They migrate up the villus, and then they're sleuthed off into the gut lumen and excreted.
So we regulate our iron levels by inviting the iron into the lobby, locking all the doors, and then demolishing the lobby a few days later.
That is the mucosal block theory in action. It's the only way we can effectively get rid of excess iron by shedding the very cells that hold it.
That is wild. What about calcium? Is it similarly controlled?
Calcium is also strictly gated, but the key holder is different. It's vitamin D.
How does that work?
Calcium can enter the intestinal cell, but it can't just diffuse across to the other side. It needs a chaperone. Vitamin D, which is technically a hormone, signals the cell to synthesize a protein called calbindin.
Calbindin.
Think of calbindin as a personal ferry boat. It picks up a calcium ion at the front door and shuttles it across the cell to the back door, where it can be pumped into the blood. Without vitamin D, you don't make the boat.
So you can drink all the milk you want, but if you're vitamin D deficient, you're not actually absorbing the calcium.
Correct. The calcium just sits there and eventually passes through. And the text also warns about inhibitors for both iron and calcium. Things like phytic acid in cereals and oxalates in spinach or rhubarb.
What do they do?
They are negatively charged molecules that bind very tightly to positively charged minerals like calcium or iron. They form insoluble salts in the gut.
They handcuff the mineral.
Effectively, if the mineral is handcuffed to an oxalate molecule, it can't be absorbed. It just gets passed out. So nutrition isn't just about what you eat. It's about the complex chemical context of the entire meal.
Let's shift to the physics of the engine. Segment 6. The physics of energy. We talk about burning calories all the time, but the text explains how we actually measure that fire.
Thermodynamics, yeah. The baseline measure is the BMR, the basal metabolic rate.
This is the engine's idling speed.
Right. It's the energy required to stay alive under very strict conditions. You have to be awake, at complete rest, in a thermally neutral environment, so not shivering or sweating, and 12 hours after your last meal.
And it varies a lot from person to person.
It does. Weight, age, gender. But the biggest variable is muscle mass. Muscle is metabolically expensive. It's always burning ATP just to maintain ion gradients, even when it's not moving. Adipose tissue, or fat, is metabolically lazy. It just sits there.
This explains why men generally have higher BMRs than women.
Yes, on average, due to higher muscle mass. And it's also why BMR tends to drop as we age. We naturally lose muscle mass.
So how do scientists measure this burn?
The most direct way is direct calorimetry. You literally put someone in a sealed, insulated room and measure the heat they give off. But that's cumbersome and expensive. The much easier way is indirect calorimetry. We measure the oxygen you consume.
Because fire needs oxygen to burn.
Exactly. Biology is just slow, controlled combustion. And there's a very reliable conversion factor. For every liter of oxygen you consume, your body generates approximately 20 kilojoules of energy.
But the text mentions a ratio called the RQ, the respiratory quotient. This was built in my mind. You can tell what someone is burning for fuel just by analyzing their breath.
You can. It's the ratio of carbon dioxide produced to oxygen consumed.
Break that down for us.
If you are burning pure carbohydrate, like glucose, the chemical equation balances perfectly. For every 6 molecules of O2 you use, you produce 6 molecules of CO2. So the ratio is 6/6, which is 1.0.
Okay, an RQ of 1.0 means you're a carb burner.
You're running on toast. But fats are different. Fats are more reduced. They have very little oxygen in their molecular structure to begin with. So to burn fat completely, you have to pull in a lot more oxygen from the air to oxidize all those carbons.
So you consume more oxygen relative to the CO2 you produce.
Which results in an RQ of about 0.7. So if I hook you up to a metabolic cart and your RQ is 1.0, you're in a fed state. If it's 0.7, you're in a fasted state, burning fat. It's a window into your metabolism.
That is incredible. But you can't walk around with a mask on all day? The text mentions a kind of sci-fi method for real-world measurement, doubly labeled water.
This is the gold standard for measuring free-living energy expenditure. It uses stable, non-radioactive isotopes. You drink a dose of water where the hydrogen is replaced with deuterium, which is heavy hydrogen, and the oxygen is replaced with oxygen-18.
So it's heavy water.
It is. Here's the trick. The heavy hydrogen, the deuterium, can only leave your body as water in sweat and urine. But the heavy oxygen-18 can leave as water and as the CO2 you breathe out.
Ah, I see where this is going.
So over a period of 1 to 3 weeks, we collect urine samples and measure how fast the 2 isotopes disappear from your body. The difference between the disappearance rate of the oxygen and the hydrogen tells us exactly how much CO2 you produced over that time.
And from the CO2, you can calculate the total calories burned.
Precisely. It allows us to measure the metabolism of an athlete training for the Olympics or a person just living their normal life with extreme accuracy.
One last concept in this section: diet-induced thermogenesis.
The tax.
The tax.
There is no free lunch, thermodynamically speaking.
Yeah.
It costs energy to process energy. The act of digestion, absorption, enzyme synthesis, gut motility, it all requires ATP.
How much is the tax?
On average, it's about 10% of the energy in the meal. So if you need a 500-calorie meal, you really only net about 450 of those calories. The other 50 are burned off as heat just processing the food.
And protein has the highest tax.
By far. Unfolding proteins, breaking them down, and then dealing with the nitrogen by synthesizing urea is very chemically expensive work. That's why high-protein meals can make you feel warmer. The meat sweats are a real thermodynamic phenomenon.
We have covered the working system in incredible detail. Now, for the final segment, segment 7. When the system fails. Malnutrition.
The text draws a really important contrast between two conditions that are often confused but are physiologically very distinct: marasmus and kwashiorkor.
Let's start with marasmus.
Marasmus is simple starvation. The text defines it as energy deficiency. The patient, usually an infant, simply isn't getting enough calories from any source.
What happens to the body?
The body adapts to the scarcity. It stops growing, it burns through its fat reserves, it breaks down muscle for energy. The patient becomes extremely emaciated, skin and bones. But, and this is a key distinction, metabolically they are stable.
Stable? How can they be stable?
The body has downregulated everything. Hormone levels drop, the BMR plummets, everything slows down to conserve energy. They are incredibly fragile, but they are in a state of balanced adaptation to scarcity.
Now contrast that with kwashiorkor.
Kwashiorkor is often called the sickness of the weaned child. The hallmark physical sign is edema fluid retention. The belly is swollen with fluid, a condition called ascites. The liver becomes fatty and enlarged. They look swollen, not starved.
What causes this? It's not just starvation then.
It's an imbalance. The classic scenario is a child who is weaned from protein-rich breast milk onto a starchy, very low-protein gruel like cassava or rice water. They are getting calories, mainly from carbohydrates, but almost no protein.
So they have fuel, but they have no building blocks.
It's worse than that. Because they're eating carbs, their insulin levels are high. And insulin's job is to tell the body, store energy, stop breaking down tissue.
So the body refuses to burn the furniture to get spare parts.
Yeah, exactly. Insulin blocks the breakdown of muscle. But the body desperately needs amino acids to make critical proteins like albumin in the blood and to build immune cells. It can't get them from the diet, and it's being blocked from getting them from its own muscle reserves.
So the whole system crashes.
It's a metabolic disaster.
Yeah.
The liver can't make albumin, which is needed to hold fluid in the blood vessels, so water leaks out into the tissues, causing the edema. The liver also can't make lipoproteins, which are needed to export fat, so fat gets trapped in the liver, causing the fatty liver.
And the text also brings up oxidative stress in this context.
Yes. Kwashiorkor is often triggered by a simple infection. The immune response to the infection creates a storm of free radicals. But because the child is so malnourished, they lash the antioxidant minerals like zinc, copper, and selenium, and the antioxidant vitamins A, C, and E that are needed to neutralize them. The free radicals just tear the cells apart, unopposed.
Finally, there's a third state mentioned in the text, cachexia.
This is the profound wasting that's seen in conditions like advanced cancer, AIDS, and chronic infections.
How is it different from marasmus, from simple starvation?
In marasmus, the BMR drops way down to save energy. In cachexia, the BMR actually increases.
The engine revs up even though there's no fuel coming in.
It's called hypermetabolism. The tumor or the infection releases inflammatory cytokines, like TNF-alpha. These molecules hijack the brain and the body's metabolism. They force the body to burn its own tissue at an accelerated rate, even if the patient is eating.
The text mentions something called futile cycling.
This is just heartbreaking biochemistry. The body will break down fat into fatty acids, and then immediately use energy to resynthesize it back into fat, and then break it down again. It runs a cycle that accomplishes nothing but wasting ATP. It just produces heat, not useful work.
It's a metabolic fire just burning the house down for no reason.
Exactly. And because of this fundamental metabolic derangement, you cannot simply reverse cachexia by feeding the patient more calories. The metabolism itself is broken.
This entire deep dive has been a revelation. We started with the simple idea of eating a sandwich, and we've uncovered this entire universe of enzymes, transporters, sensors, and feedback loops.
It is humbling, isn't it?
Yeah.
We're looking at a system that is an absolute master of extraction. It has backup plans for its backup plans, like the colipase saving the lipase from the bile salts. It has incredible safeguards, like the zymogens preventing self-digestion.
But it is also incredibly fragile.
Fragile in its specificity. One missing enzyme, like lactase, and you can't drink milk. One missing transporter for an essential amino acid and you can't build protein. One blocked regulator for iron, and you either become anemic or you poison yourself.
And as we said right at the start, it is fundamentally mismatched for our modern world.
That is the final provocative thought for me. We evolved SGLT1 to fight for every last molecule of glucose because starvation was the constant existential threat. We evolved a system with hepcidin to hoard every atom of iron because blood loss and parasites were common. Now, in a world of supersized sodas and fortified cereals and sedentary lives, that same beautiful life-saving efficiency is driving the obesity epidemic.
We are high-performance machines that were designed for a famine, and we are living in a 24-hour buffet.
And the machine doesn't know how to stop. It just does what it was programmed for millennia to do.
Yeah.
Survive,
Yeah.
extract, hoard.
So the next time you sit down to eat, just take a second, look at your plate, and imagine the factory floor waking up. The amylase in your saliva, the acid pumps in your stomach, the bile salts waiting in the gallbladder. It is an industrial marvel, and it is happening right inside you right now.
Bon appétit.
Thanks for listening to The Deep Dive. We'll catch you on the next one.